Hello, cozy detectives, and welcome to the Blanket Fort Files. I'm Larissa,
And I'm Joy.
and we're here to report on all things comfy and cozy.
This is a bonus episode
Yay!
for the YouTube Cozy Detectives because we did a episode on Spotify and on YouTube about Galentine's Day and our favorite female friendships. And in order to do this subject justice, we decided to go to its whole own mini episode. So today, we'll see how long we end up going. but
Yeah, mini.
I know.
We'll
Ooh, we'll see.
see.
We'll see. We are talking about Gilmore Girls friendships. So everything from Rory and Lorelai down to a few what ifs, which we'll talk about towards the end, of
Yeah.
like different characters we wish interacted or what if this had happened versus this. So should we just start with the top of the female friendships of Rory and Lorelai?
Yes. Real quick, though,
Yeah.
if this is your first time seeing
Yeah.
us, hello, welcome to our Blanket Fort.
Woohoo.
We are what we like to call a true cozy podcast. And every week, for the most part, we do a couple of special ranking episodes, which is what this one was from, where we do our hard hitting cozy reporting, we like to call it, on different cozy case files from anything from books, TV shows, movies, video games. We just recorded an episode on mall stores, so nothing is off the table as long as it's cozy or nostalgic. We will talk about it. But yes, I'm very excited to deep dive into what show brought us together, Gilmore Girls.
Yes, that is also true. If this is your first time, this is not our first time with Gilmore Girls. So we have been hanging around for 25 years this
I
year.
know.
So wild. So wild. But getting into a few of the female friendships that we see on the show, Rory and Lorelai, or Lorelai and
Yes.
Rory. How do you feel about them? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting too because I see them more, and I think this is just how they're written, as friends, and they even say we're best friends first, mother and daughter second, because I think a lot of the time that friendship kind of clouds the mother daughter relationship in a way. And while it's not always healthy in the way that they approach things, I think their friendship is at the root of everything they do. So when they do have conflict, they approach it a lot of time as friends rather than a mother and daughter would handle conflict, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like also Lorelai will like kind of draw a line in the sand when she's like, okay, I'm pulling out the mom card or we're doing things my way, which I think also lends itself to the fact that they kind of default into the friend to friend type of relationship. And then if Lorelai feels like there's a need to like pull the mom card, she will. But I think that also just has to do with I really feel like they're growing up together throughout the show
Mm-hmm.
and like kind of maturing together, and they have some of those like friend to friend type fights. Even the like your boobs are totally bigger than mine, I feel like would be a very like interesting dynamic for like a mother daughter type of a fight, but I
Yeah.
could see more so like the friend to friend type of a fight in that. And that's again in season 1, so it's like very early on in their I guess upbringing is kind of a way to say that. So I feel like that again is probably I feel like in the show again, it's focused around the two main characters being Rory and Lorelai. So I feel like theirs would be my favorite friendship, but I think that also it is kind of tricky because having I'm an only child, so having like seeing my mom and like I grew up with the show, and like my mom and I had like different versions of like friendships at times, and also when you get older, I feel like it kind of can blend more into a friendship. But I feel like it's interesting that theirs is like friendship first, mother daughter second, like you were
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah. If you had to, we didn't plan this, so if you can't think of something off the top of your head, it's okay. If you had to give their friendship a 1
Mm.
to 10 rating, what would you give them?
So is the plan to do this with all of them? Because I feel like I don't know. Well, actually, I think I know what my first one
Yeah,
would
and we
be.
don't have to necessarily make this in terms of like whatever rating we
Versus,
give
yeah,
them is a
yeah.
ranking, but just like if you were to give them a grade, what
I
would their grade be?
I think it would be. See, it's kind of tricky because I think again, unfortunately don't love A Year in the Life as much as I had hoped I would. So I think
Yeah.
taking the original series as that type of 1 to 10, I think or 1 to 10. I was going to say actually B plus is what my brain was saying. Um,
Yeah.
so I feel like maybe an 8, because I feel
Yeah.
like there's
That's
things.
mine.
Yeah, okay. Because I feel like there's things they can definitely improve upon, but I do think it's a very strong friendship, and I think that a lot of times they do listen to each other in ways that I feel like is good and important. But I feel like also thinking about Rory just deciding fully on her own and just like in a very immature way, just being like, okay, I'm leaving Yale because of one man's opinion. I feel like that like is very opposite of what her mom would have wanted. And
Yeah.
so I feel like an 8. I feel like it's overall pretty
Yeah.
good for them.
That would be my same grade. So we're
Yeah.
on track there. Our next relationship is Rory and Lane.
I originally loved the friendship because it's very similar in like knowing from like being a small child all the way up to a friendship that I have with one of my girlfriends. And I feel like in that aspect, I loved it. I think looking back on certain, like I literally just saw a reel about like your friend is leaving to go to Korea, like get off the bench and go say bye. I
I
just
saw that same one, and I made the
like,
same
girl.
point when I covered that episode because for me, not to like
No,
hijack
no,
your
do it.
conversation,
Yeah.
I think Lane is a very good friend. I think Rory is a horrible friend to Lane a lot of the
Throughout
time.
the
Not
whole series.
mhm. Not not every time. I think there are times where Rory's a good friend to her, but there's just so many moments. Like I think of that moment where she does not, she's just cuddling with Dean. She doesn't get up, and people try to say, oh, well, they had their goodbye. And I'm like, I'm sorry. Lane at that moment doesn't think she's coming back. She thinks this
Yeah.
is the last time she's going to see you. Get off that bench,
Yeah,
please.
she's got the suitcase the size of a house on top of that
Yeah.
car. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then the time when in Love, War, and Snow, where Lane is trying to talk to her, and she's like, "Oh, I need to meet Dean. I need to give him cookies." And like, I get Rory. It's not her fault that she gets stuck at her grandparents' house, but like,
Yeah.
I just hate that. And then, like, they don't really stay in touch when Rory goes off to Yale. Like, whenever we see them reconnect, it's like, oh, I haven't seen you in so long. We haven't talked in so
Yeah.
long, and that just, I don't know, that hurts a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. I wish, because obviously you can't show every aspect of somebody's life in a TV show, especially when it's
Right.
focused on two main characters. I would argue focused on two, but I mean maybe it's just because I always identified more with Lorelai that I feel like maybe Lorelai is like the main character.
Yeah.
Um, but I feel like again, there could have been easier ways to give more grace to their friendship if it, instead of what you said about like, oh, I haven't talked to you in so long, if it's like if they had just continued a conversation that maybe we
Right.
didn't hear but they had like off screen, it would have felt more like their friendship was stronger throughout college. But I think that's the part for me of like, I really feel like their friendship kind of falls off, and I feel like, yeah, like every time especially, so that's kind of almost a what if that I had that I was trying to think about of like, what if Rory hadn't gone to Chilton and had just
Mm.
stayed at Stars Hollow High? Like, how would that have impacted their friendship? Because I feel like, again, once she transitions to a different school, because like, especially in the first episode, it feels like they're like constantly, like, again, you're in the same school, but you're
Yeah.
constantly hanging out. And I feel like that friendship just gets a little bit more tricky, even to the point where like Lane, like, dude, that would be so embarrassing in high school. You just touch a guy's hair and then I would just run too. I'd be
I
like, bye forever.
know.
I'm moving.
Yeah. Well, and I
So
think too, part of what also bothers me is like we're told like they've been best friends since like kindergarten.
yeah.
And I just like there are times where they talk about serious stuff. Like I think Rory kind of gets a little bit of input when she's starting to date Jess, and Lane gets input when she's into Dave and stuff. But there's so many times where I feel like you would talk to your best friend, and I get
Yeah.
in their mind, and Rory's mind, Lorelai's her best friend, but like she never, like when she dropped out of Yale, she never talked to Lane about that
Yep.
until she was needing to move in with her for a time.
Yep.
And so I just feel like there's so many big moments in their life that
Yeah.
the other isn't there for. Um, even like when Lane has the twins, Rory's off on that road trip wedding, and so she's not even there for her best friend having kids.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like it does have a little bit of a harsh reality of being in different places with close friends, but I think also
Mhm.
like even like saying things on a phone conversation about like the twins love the gift that you sent them, or just like little things
Yeah.
like that where it shows that they are more connected off screen than we see. But
Mhm.
because there's none of that and there is the opposite of like I haven't seen you in so long, it just lends itself to us believing that even though they say they're best friends, they're not connecting other than the times that we see them connect.
Yeah.
Okay, another Rory and
Oh, real
Paris.
quick,
Oh yeah.
what rating will you give them?
Oh,
Really quick. I can do mine first if you
yeah,
want.
you do yours first.
I will give them season like 1 through 3. I would give them like a 5. I'd give
Mm.
Lane a 6, Rory a 5. I think once we get into more of the Yale years, specifically 5 through 6, because I like 4 when Lane moves into her dorm for a bit,
Yeah.
I would give them a 4.
See, I was gonna give them like a 5 or a 6 because I feel
Hmm.
like they try, and I just like I'm hoping that that off screen interaction's happening without us knowing.
Yeah.
But yeah, from what we see on screen, I feel like a 4 is really appropriate.
Yeah.
And again, I feel like more on the Lane side of connecting than on the Rory side because I feel like Rory
Yeah.
sometimes will kind of forget, which stinks. But okay, Rory and Paris.
I again, I feel like this is where Rory just isn't a good friend overall. I think Paris definitely, in her own way, like Paris is just like a kind of a hard-headed person, but I think for the most part on her core, she's a good friend. Like I really love the moment. And there's the rub where she has the excuse that Jess is there because she has a crush on him.
Yep.
So I like those moments, but then I also think of their lower moments, like when Rory becomes editor and Paris kicks her out of the
Yeah.
apartment.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
I think Paris is a very disagreeable person, and I feel like Rory being a very agreeable person, I think that's where sometimes we can see a like a friction almost.
Hmm.
And I think also they have different insecurities. I would argue that I think one of Rory's insecurities, which also bleeds into Rory and Lane, is like the I don't know exactly how to describe it. It's like the guy issues side of
Hmm.
Rory. Whereas I feel like Paris's has a lot to do with achieving, and like if she feels like
Yeah.
somebody's overshadowing her achievements or something like that, I think that can hit her insecurities. But I do think that Paris is one of those friends that will just fight for you, and like the way that you
Hmm.
like want a friend to like be there, and like especially if you're I think of the one where Rory is basically asking to move back in with Paris after her and Logan break up. And then
Yeah.
Paris is like at the door, just like not letting Logan in. And I feel like that's a really good friend moment. Now he pushes past her, but I think it's also something where like she's just like so feisty about it and with it. And I appreciate that in a friend because she is like ride or die
Yeah.
for Rory in that
And
type of way.
we get such a good Paris line where she calls him New England's favorite whorehound.
So good.
Yeah.
And I
I
feel like,
think
yeah.
for me, and this just kind of goes in the fact that I think Paris has one of the best character growths
Yeah.
on the show, but I think
Agree.
their friendship growth
Yeah.
overall, because when we see them as like arch enemies in season 1 to where they end in season 7, I think for me, that's why if I had to sit down and pick one of them versus Rory and Lane and Rory and Paris, I would choose Rory and Paris, I think, only for like they end up growing in their friendship, whereas I think Rory and Lane kind of backslide a little bit for me.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement. I think still Lane and Rory have a soft spot in my heart because of my
Oh, for
personal
sure.
connection with it.
Yeah.
But I do think that yeah, we see them kind of backslide versus I feel like a lot of it has to do with Paris's growth, like you were saying, of I would say in the first few seasons because of just her hurt from her parents and just hurt from other things, even like going to the Tristan side of things. I think she's
Yeah.
very defensive very quickly. And then I think when she realizes that Rory actually is on her side, I feel like that's when we also really start to see Paris kind of open up and be vulnerable in certain ways that we definitely didn't see at the beginning with Paris. I think that's kind of like that prickly pear outer, but like she really does have like a soft center to her. Well,
Yeah.
nougat center or whatever that phrasing is.
Yeah. What grade would you give them?
Maybe a 6 or a 7,
Yeah.
depending. I don't think
That's
we can
where I'm
go
at.
to the Lorelai level of it because I do think they have a better relationship. But again, it doesn't have to be a comparison. So
Yeah.
I think even just taking it out of the comparison, I probably would still give them a 7.
Yeah, I would be depending on where we are, anywhere from like a 5 through a 7. I
Yeah.
think where they end, I would give
Yeah.
them a 7, especially when we see them in a year in the life. They're still very close.
Yeah.
So I would agree with that. All right,
Okay.
jumping into both of one of our top 3 that we talked about in our actual main episode, Lorelai and Suki.
Cute. I love them. Okay, I have a potential hot take that
Ooh,
I feel like maybe it's because they're the same like age range, but I would say that their friendship is a stronger one, and maybe it's because you're not also kind of conflating the daughter mother relationship of it. Um, Depending, I would probably give them an 8 or a 9 because
mhm,
I do see like even though they will have hurtful moments towards each other, specifically Lorelai towards Suki, sometimes she'll just like put her foot directly in her mouth. She'll
yeah,
immediately realize and be like, "Oh, that was so stupid. Like why
yeah.
did I say that out of just like my own personal hurt?" Um what are your thoughts on them as friends?
No, I would agree with that completely. I would probably give them a 9 just because I think and maybe it's more of the adultness
Yeah.
of things where they are able to resolve their conflict a little
Yeah.
bit more easier than Rory and Lorelai, but obviously they're the main couple, so they're going to have more conflict in general
Mhm.
because it's a show. But I think they work really well in their dynamic of just playing to their strengths, and because they have a very unique relationship of
Yeah.
we're best friends, but we're also business partners. And that can obviously get really tricky sometimes. And I think
Yeah.
for the most part, obviously, like you said, there are some pitfalls with that. And I think there's times where they're both at fault. I think Lorelai can tend to be on that a little bit more. Um, I think especially of that scene where Suki's talking about her and Max, and then
That's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah.
Lorelai's like, "When was the last time you were with someone?" And then immediately realizes that was a bad thing to say. But
Mhm.
I love them a lot dearly, so I would also give them an 8 or a 9, leaning more on the 9 side.
Yeah, I agree. And to like Lorelai's side of it, having like the hospitality background, in thinking about having a chef constantly changing the menu, that's so much money that
Yeah,
like you don't really have to spend. And so
right,
there is an aspect of that where there's the creative side of it, which is wonderful, but there's also the practical side of it of like maybe we don't have the money to have you like the day before an event try to switch up the entirety of the menu because we just bought all this other stuff. So
right. Oh, for sure, I would agree. And someone who cooks, the fact of like changing a menu that frequently
yeah.
would stress me out.
Yeah, I think that's where like we're supposed to lean towards on the fact that Suki is very creative. But again, like so she's supposed to just change an entire like menu for a full event in 12
Right.
hours.
Where
Like
do you
what
get
about
all
the
that
staff?
food?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like what if you have to bake something? Like you show the kitchen that there's one oven. Like in theory
yeah,
you're constantly having that thing rotate. So it's like, oh, no prep I guess happened in that scenario. So
yeah,
I think that's where like, oh, that's stressed me out watching it
for
of like,
sure.
that's too much. Too much. Okay, one of your favorites of the series,
Yeah.
Madeline and Louise. What are your
Uh,
thoughts?
they're so good. And it's so funny because, like, as people, they're probably like not really good people, but in terms of friendship, Matt and Louise get like a 9 or a 10 for me because I think that they are really there for each other. They never have like a conflict with each other. Like they'll have
Yeah,
conflict with others. At the end of the day, they are each other's ride or die all the time. And I just don't think we get that good of depiction of friendship that healthy in kind of like these weird characters, but I don't know, I just love them so much. And I wish truly, like, I believe that they grow up to become like a Babette and Miss Patty, but
yeah,
I just wish we got to see them in a year in the life because
agreed.
I really want to know where they ended up.
Totally agreed. I also feel like in thinking about where they would be in a year in the life, I feel like they would have like married like twins or something, or like
Yeah,
be in the same neighborhood for sure because I think that they are that ride or die. And in the conflict that we kind of see is either just like them with school in general or them with certain aspects of pairs. But yeah,
yeah,
they're just like always there for each other and chilling and hanging and having fun. And I feel like sometimes high school friendships can it potentially even just like get too heavy in certain ways of like in the best case scenario we're high schoolers like Let's
Yeah.
just like have fun and chill. And I feel like we get to see that in that friendship, which is really fun, as opposed to like the Rory and Paris side of it, where it has the competitive nature, it has the like comparison nature, it has the heavy school nature of it, where yeah, I feel like Madeline and Louise are just the fun nothingness in certain aspects, but also like
Yeah.
really are there for each other too in the healthy aspect of it. So I like
Yeah.
them a
And
lot.
like I get they're side characters. They're not gonna have deep, heavy conflict, but I think that we get enough moments to see that that is a real friendship. Like I mentioned this
Yeah.
on the full episode of like how Louise like knew Madeline was going to be bothered about blood and like their shenanigans in spring break. Like I don't know. I just think that they really do care about each other at the end of the
Yeah.
day. So I don't know. I love them a lot.
I agree. I think even the fact that we just like see them show up together just like out of nowhere just shows that like yeah, they were going to hang out this spring break, like whether we saw
Mhm.
them on camera or not type of a deal.
Yep.
So, yeah, I like it. Okay, going to the potential adult version of it, Babette and Miss
Yes.
Patty. Love.
Repping my girl.
Love. So good. I
Yeah.
wish we got to see more of them, which is like obviously like going to be a theme throughout a lot of this for me. But yeah, I really love their friendship. I think it's hilarious. I imagine them having been friends for the entirety of their time. I mean, if Miss Patty owns a studio, she clearly has been heavily invested in Stars Hollow for a long time.
Yeah.
And I think that also the fact that Babette is married, but like still has this strong of a friendship, I love. And I feel like they're just hilarious together. And I would say they're a 10 for me for sure.
Yeah, they're gonna be my only 10.
Yeah.
And I mean, granted, like you said, we see a lot of them, but not always together. And
Hmm.
so a lot of this is just kind of speculation. But I just believe that they are each other's best friend. They obviously
Yeah.
like we get enough backstory to know like when something happens that you know that you love that friend. Like you find out some gossip or news,
Yeah.
who are you going to first? Right. And like I just think that, like you said, even though Babette is married, Miss Patty is still like a very important person in her life. I could see that like them going on double dates as, you know, Miss Patty looks for like husband number 5 or something.
Yeah.
And I just, and this is why like Grace and Frankie were on my number 1 on my list as well, is I just really love older women friendships because
Yeah.
I think those tend to be so true. Like they don't have time for games and playing around. Like who you're friends with in that last chapter of your life are so important. And yeah, I love Beva and Patty more than anything.
Absolutely. And it's also things too where like you could see in the Cinnamon's Wake episode just their relationship
Yes.
there really strongly. And I could also, when you're talking about like husband number 5, I could totally see Babette going to Maury and just trying to like poke him for any guy friends that he has
Yeah.
to try to be like, okay, who can we set her up with? So
Yeah.
I just love it.
Honestly, maybe this is like Gilmore Girls After Dark. I could see them ending up as like a throuple or something.
I don't think I can see it going that far, but it's hilarious. Oh my gosh, it's so funny. Okay.
Next,
Next up, go for it.
yeah, we'll do. Now we're getting into some more. These are like the main ones. Now we're getting a little more obscure.
Yeah.
But we have Lucy and Olivia, purely season 7 friendship. So, what are your thoughts there?
I feel like this one for me is like not the opposite of Madeline and Louise, but I feel like it's like kind of trying to make Madeline and Louise in college instead of just bringing
Yeah,
them back, because they start so quirky and so fun and so like carefree. But then I feel like we really see specifically with like the addition of Marty how like not very carefree and fun and like chill they are. And I feel like I don't know. I think I struggle with them a little. Like the friends with each other, I feel like they could definitely still be, but I don't like the fact that and yes, I would say Rory like got put in an awkward position and like didn't respond correctly either, but instead of just like talking to Rory about it, they just like dump her.
yeah,
So that's where I'm like,
yeah.
eh.
I think them together as a unit, I like, and I would say that they would be a strong friendship. Obviously, we don't see enough to really know like how they
Yeah.
handle conflict. Based on what we see, just the two of them, I would give them like a 7 or an 8. Character wise, just for what they serve as their purpose, I don't like I know that the writers were probably struggling to think of something to do for Rory that season at Yale. Um, and so it just kind of felt like their dynamic was kind of like a trying too hard.
Yeah.
I hate Lucy calling Marty boyfriend all the time. Like I get it was supposed to be this big reveal. That just annoys me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I understand why they didn't want to be friends with Rory after all of that, but I also don't think we really got resolution because like they're
Yeah.
friends again after that. Like we see them all at graduation, and it almost feels like oh, we're the sisterhood of traveling pants moment at
Yeah.
graduation where they've like been best friends all of college, and I'm like they
Nah,
just
girl.
got on the scene, but
Specifically
okay,
with Paris. I'm like, what?
yeah,
What are you talking
yeah,
about? Like, yeah, I would agree with that. I don't know. I think maybe just because the way that we see them interact with Rory, and if they're supposed to be that close of friends, you would hope that they would be able to have that harder conversation of like, okay, can you explain like what went on, or like give
yeah,
the benefit of the doubt in the scenario of like maybe like it just was such an awkward place to be put in. And again, you're supposed to be like what 20, like even though you're 20, like you're not 40, like you're still figuring like stuff out,
right,
obviously, and even at 40, you're figuring stuff out. So it's like I feel like the fact that Rory got that wrong was the like linchpin for them being like, okay, we can't be friends any longer. And I feel like again, like you'd hope that you give your friend the benefit of the doubt and just talk to them or talk through something. So I don't know. I remember when I first watched it, I was not a fan, to be honest.
yeah,
I feel like the older I've gotten, the more I can understand certain aspects of it. And even thinking about it from like the writing side of it, like you're talking about, it makes more sense. But when I first saw it, it felt very just like wedged in there
forced,
out of nowhere.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I felt like they were really trying to replicate the magic of Madeline Louise,
Yeah.
and, like, part of that is, A, they were high school, so some of their dynamic worked in that way, and I think you just also had part of their dynamic was that it was almost a trio with Paris, and they were
Yeah.
so different from Paris, but the 3 kind of came as a package deal, whereas Lucy and Olivia were just, like, boyfriend and we're artists and we're quirky and it just didn't feel authentic in the same way that Madeline Louise do.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's a really good point too, because in theory, I've always thought like maybe if they just got more like background to their like friendship, or we got to see more, maybe they'd make more sense. But I feel like the amount that we see them is kind of the amount that we see Madeline and Louise to a certain extent, and I feel like Madeline and Louise feel more maybe believable as
Yeah.
like that strong friendship, whereas this one feels like okay, but what if like either of them do something wrong? Like, are you just gonna like dump that
Right.
friend
Yeah, we
or
just don't really get enough information. So like
yeah?
again, what based on what we see, I could give them a 7, but if we really got to spend time with them, it could go all the way down to like a 3 or 4.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. Okay, another we're zooming out a little bit more here, but Emily and the DAR ladies.
Yes. I had to put this on my list because I was like, I need to talk about Emily at some point. And we don't really see her with friends because obviously it's she and Lorelai don't have any sort of like friendship. They do have a relationship, but there's no like friendship aspect of it. So I was
Yeah,
like, okay, Emily does kind of have friends. They kind of shift a little bit. Um, and I just think it's a very interesting dynamic because status is obviously very important in those relationships. And we see kind of a sense of that fizzle out in A Year in the Life. Um, and it's just interesting because like I mentioned like your friendships at that age are very important, but those friendships are all fake, they're all like
yeah,
status driven, and so yeah, I would give that like a 1 or a 2 honestly.
yeah. Absolutely agree. I feel like Emily really from like the first time that her and Richard got together, I feel like she was like, "This is my role," and it's kind of interesting because I think to a certain extent, I just think it was like a lot of factors that led her to believe like this is her role. Some of it her, some of it Richard, some of it just the environment that they're in, some of it
Mhm.
clearly her mother-in-law, and like the like never living up to that without fully knowing that until she looks at the letter. Um, but I feel like yeah, even when we see them out on the back patio there, I feel like it feels not real.
Mhm.
And I wish if it was real, we would have gotten to see in the year in the life when she is mourning the passing of Richard that like those ladies are there for her and we don't see that. And I
Yeah.
feel like it lends itself to like, okay, well, the status of this, now you're a different status. And so it's very kind of like tit for tat of things.
Yeah, it's very artificial and just like
Yeah.
surface level shallow. But I do love when they're trying to rank the best founding father, though.
Yeah. See, and I think that's where too, like, you can have
They
friends
have
for a
some fun
season.
conversations. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And also just I think if you go into it with the mentality of like these are the DAR ladies and like we'll hang out when we hang out, but like if something really heavy happens, like these aren't like my people type of a
Right.
deal. I think that also kind of can help with the expectations of that friendship. Or what that friendship even looks like because like yeah, like you can still have really fun moments and I feel like that shows in that scene for sure.
Yeah. All right. This one I put on here with a question mark because I think they're really trying to replicate what Lorelai and Rory have.
Yeah.
So I would say there's a friend element there, but April and Anna. And it's hard because
Yeah.
like my like thoughts on them are so tainted by Anna's character and what she does and
Yeah.
how she treats Luke and things. But the moments that we see just the two of them, I do really like their relationship a lot. It's hard though because it feels so like copy paste of Lorelai and Rory in a way. Like when she's like, "Are you watching TV? Yes. Is it something stupid?" But then I think about like when she paints the mural and nail polish on April's wall. So I think they have some really sweet moments, but just in terms of the show and like what other relationships we have to see, it's just hard to like really root and love and care for them because it's just copy paste. Even the fact that like Sherilyn Flynn auditioned for Lorelai, so it like,
Yeah. Yeah. I would agree with that. I feel like the phrasing of it's hard to root for them is the exact phrasing that I feel when thinking about that mother-daughter dynamic because I think also not showing Luke like any grace in it even though you never told him that he had a kid is very hard.
yeah,
Um and I think thinking about it from either the mother perspective or the daughter perspective of that, I think that would for me personally be like a tricky connection in a mother-daughter relationship if like your mom hadn't told you something for 13 plus years of your life type of a deal, but I think there are aspects that can be really sweet in the friendship side of it, but I don't know if I have a like strong opinion on that because I don't feel like I maybe I just like wasn't paying attention to it as much. Maybe I just would skip her scenes. I don't know. Just like it's all right.
yeah. I don't know if I could even give them really a rating just because
Yeah.
we're shown them so little. Um, but yeah, I had thought one. But the next one you added to the list, so I'm excited to hear your thoughts.
I was thinking of Lorelai and Mia in the friendship
Mhm.
aspect of it. I really like that we get I was actually even thinking about this before we were recording about how Emily and Mia have that conversation about like I wish somebody would have given my daughter this if she had come to the door and then it's like, well, I wish somebody would have just sent her home.
Mhm.
And I feel like that's too much weight to put on Mia because what's Lorelai supposed to pull up and be like, "Hi, here's me and my baby, and here's my parents' address." Like, you know what I mean? Like, no,
Right.
she's not going to say that. So if Mia had turned her away, I think Lorelai would have just gone to another place. Like, she wouldn't have been like, "Okay,
Right.
fine, I'm going home." So I feel like I really enjoy seeing their friendship. They clearly, and this is where maybe like I wish that this had been shown more. Again, going back to Rory and Lane, but there's like the really excitement when they see each other, and sometimes it feels like as an owner and a manager of a property, you would be in so much communication, and the fact that Mia sees Lorelai for like starting like walking up to the front door is the potential to like own a business. I feel like that shows that she has a lot of faith and trust in Lorelai because like in theory before Lorelai, Mia was the Lorelai of that place, and so
Mhm.
seeing yourself in somebody else and like showing them how to do the business and showing them how this works and that works and different jobs because she starts as a housekeeper and like how does that play out in like the business in totality all the way up to being the person that is also like the general manager would have very intense meetings about like the finances of the business and that's something that's very vulnerable as an owner to share to somebody. So I really enjoy their relationship. Again, I wish we got to see it more. I've talked about this before, but I think the first Mia to me feels a little bit more like
Yeah.
the Mia that I wish like the second Mia does good. I just think it's tricky because the first one is so beloved and they have such a good chemistry.
Yeah.
Um, Even the fact that like they're at her wedding and they're doing things like that. Speaking of the second Mia, so what are your thoughts?
Yeah. I I don't know if I would classify their relationship as friendship, but
Ooh.
obviously, like, we have other mother-daughter combinations on here, so it makes total sense. I really love that Mia becomes, like, a pseudo mom for Lorelai. I wish we did get to see their relationship more because the one technically two, but really the first episode that we see them, you can tell that there's this like interesting dynamic because like Mia's a little stern with her a little bit at times. And so like that motherliness comes out. And I wish we got some more flashbacks
Yeah.
to when we see young Lorelai, if we could also see her interacting with Mia, I would have loved to see. But I think all of your points are so good and that Mia really shaped Lorelai into obviously like the business person that she is, but just I think as a person because like she was still in that developmental stage
Yeah.
of, becoming an adult, figuring out things on her own. And I'm sure that, Mia helped like take care of Rory and
Yeah.
changing diapers and all of that. Um, but I also think it is kind of interesting, like you mentioned, like there doesn't seem to be as much communication between them once and obviously it's just the way of a show like you can't have we could call Mia and ask her about this but yeah it just feels like Lorelai is the only one over the Independence Inn and that's
Mhm.
it versus where I'm like no it's still technically Mia's in but
Yeah.
that's neither here nor there.
And I also wonder too if Mia's in her 60s when we see her, she would have been in her like late 40s, mid 40s, somewhere around there.
Mhm.
And I wonder if those like 15 years leading up to Lorelai being the manager, Mia just like got to a point where she felt like she could be so hands off with it.
Yeah, that's true.
I do wish that we saw more communication overall because I do feel like again, if Mia's the owner, I think we hear Lorelai thinking about what Mia would want, but not like asking Mia what Mia would want.
Yeah,
So I wish we got to see that a little bit more.
yeah. Well, do you want to get into some what if questions?
Yes, yes. You go first because we can go flip flop back and forth.
All right. I have one. This one's a little more silly, but just since they get compared a lot, and even we did too, who do you think would win in a fight? Madeline and Louise or Lucy and Olivia? Who's
Matt,
scrappier?
Madeline and Louise,
Yeah,
100%. A
for sure.
100%.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would
I think there's
agree.
no doubt in my mind about that. I feel
Yeah.
like the other duo would try, but then I just feel like the scrappiness of Madeline and Louise would take over so quickly.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. I just like that was the first thing I thought of, and I was like, "This is such a silly question," but we're gonna talk about it.
No, I love it. I love it. I have an interesting one of would Emily and Penelon Lot be friends if they hadn't both known Richard or if they hadn't had
I
previous interaction?
almost asked you something like this, or like try to figure out a way to put them on here because when I listed Emily and the DAR ladies, I was just like, I really want Emily to have a friend.
Yep.
And I think Penelon could have been that. Even if they did both know Richard and they had that dating history, I would have loved some sort of like redemption arc rather than
Yep.
the like yearly lunch story. I would have loved of them like kind of bristling at first, but then almost like a Paris and Rory like rekindling growth. I
Yep.
think that could have been a cool dynamic to see the two of them have.
Absolutely. That's what I was thinking too, because I guess I phrased it as if like they hadn't known Richard, but I guess, yeah, we could have had a similar backstory. But yeah, I do not like that every year I have a lunch with an ex type of a like I
Yeah.
don't like. But I wish if it had been not even that part of it, but they had just seen her at the game and then they just start connecting and realizing they actually do have a lot in common.
Yeah.
I feel like that could have been nice because again, we don't really see like who does Emily have, to be honest? Like,
Yeah, that's the thing is like she has those DAR ladies, but obviously like they're
yeah.
not good friends. Although we did get the iconic remember to thank Penelon Lot just for being Penelon Lot in her rose. So like I do
Yeah.
love that moment with Emily.
Yeah. Fun. Okay, what's your
All
next
right.
one?
It is. What kind of friendship do you think Paris and Lane would have if like Rory really wasn't in the dynamic?
Nice. I wrote like as one of my like it wasn't like a question, but like a couple of people I wish we saw in my interaction, and it was Paris and
Hmm.
Lane.
Yeah.
And I feel like I feel like very similar to an Emily, Mrs. Kim, they would have a lot of mutual respect for each other. I don't know if they would be super close, but I do think they would give each other real thoughts about like specifically like the guy side of things. 'Cause
Mhm.
I think Paris would have told Lane to like, no, you go get Dave, or like, no, don't settle type of a deal.
Yeah.
And I feel like the vice versa of that too. I wish we'd gotten, again, I keep going back to the Rory and Lane, but I wish we'd gotten, like you said, like more asking of questions between the two of them in like the friendship way that you would normally do with a friend. But I think they could have been friends. I don't think they would have been best friends though.
Yeah. I think there could be a world in which if Rory wasn't there, I think Rory being there, and obviously that's how they would meet, but if there was a world in which it was just the two of them, I think there could be room for Paris to kind of just like expose Lane to new things and ideas. Like obviously Rory does that, but I think just in a different way. And I think Paris would almost give Lane a little bit more gumption to stand up to her mom
That's a good
because
point. Yeah.
Paris is so gutsy. Um, but I also think that Lane would do a really good job with making Paris a little bit softer because I think Rory is almost like doormat type of vibes with
Yeah.
Paris at times, where I think Lane has enough gutsiness to herself where she just like wouldn't take Paris's abuse and just be like,
Yeah.
cut it out. But that's all just like speculation in my mind.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too about like kind of like the spunkiness or like disagreeable is not a bad word to use, but I think like to a certain extent, Lane is definitely more disagreeable than Rory. So I think like you were saying about like if Paris like says something to Lane, Lane would just like be like, no. And I feel
Yeah.
like Paris needs that sometimes with somebody just being like, no, chill out. Like, no,
Yeah.
thank you. So, okay.
What's
So
your next one?
what if Liz and TJ moved to Stars Hollow earlier or they had never left? Would she be friends with Lulu or Suki?
Ooh, I like that. Lulu for sure. I think just because Suki can be a little quirky and silly, but I think Lulu and Liz are silly enough where they would get
Mhm.
into all kinds of like antics and that's a fun dynamic to think about. But yeah, I wish we could have seen them like if Lulu grew up there as them as friends or like if Liz stayed the whole time. But I think they could be a little silly, almost Babette and Patty like. I think especially Liz because she tends to be more of the like growl side of things.
Yeah.
But yeah, oh, that's fun. I've never thought about that dynamic, but I think that could be really fun.
Yeah, I was trying to think of Lulu, like who's Lulu's friends, you know? I was
Yeah,
trying to think of it in that way of like who in the town would Lulu connect with, or if Liz was still there, I feel like they would have definitely been friends.
yeah.
So that was one of mine.
That's so fun. Mine's also kind of like had she stayed, not Liz, but Rachel.
Mm.
And if they didn't share this relationship with Luke, what kind of friendship do you think Lorelai and Rachel could have had?
That's a good question. I feel like we see them have like an interesting banter in Luke's apartment,
Mm-hmm.
but part of me a little bit wonders if that's because Lorelai, when she also feels uncomfortable, will really go into the banter side of things.
Yeah.
Um, so if taking Luke out of that like connection and scenario, I think they could be friends. Um, I don't know if I feel strongly enough to like plant my flag in that camp because I do think Lorelai also will really go into humor and sarcasm and things like that when she feels uncomfortable, and I think she definitely felt uncomfortable being in there.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know if we really see Rachel because we don't see her really interact with like other people in the town. Like
Mm-hmm.
I wish that Suki had given a little bit more backstory or something like that when she mentions it to Lorelai, because I would have liked to know how she interacted with everybody in the town. But we just know that Luke liked her a lot.
Yeah.
So, what are your
I
thoughts?
think I think there could have been some ish friendship, but if it's the idea of like Rachel is still Rachel, where she doesn't want to stay in Stars Hollow
Yeah,
and wants to travel around, I don't think that would really work very well. But at the same time, I think Rachel could kind of push Lorelai a little bit in that because Lorelai is very much staying there. Like
Yeah.
she wouldn't move with Chris when they got married. Like Luke, she wouldn't even want to move into the Twickham house. Like she's very much like stuck in her ways. And I think Rachel maybe could have pushed her a little bit just to like, hey, you know, you don't have to like live super far. You could still live in Stars Hollow, but like move into a different house or
Yeah.
go on more trips. So I think that could have been an interesting dynamic. But I also think that Lorelai cannot, and this is going to sound kind of mean, but I don't think she can have other pretty single friends. Because like obviously like at the beginning of the show she has Suki and Suki's single, but Suki gets in a relationship with Jackson like halfway through season 1. And so I just feel like Lorelai's the kind of person where she likes the one that gets to go on the dates and have these like boyfriend stories. And I just feel like there'd be too much of her and Rachel competing. Even if Luke was off the table, I just don't know if she would like having that kind of competition with Rachel, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was thinking of it in like the quirkiness factor of it because I
Yeah.
feel like they kind of make Rachel like a little quirky, and it's like okay, if that had been fully fleshed out, I don't think Lorelai would like that because I feel like Lorelai also really enjoys being the quick-witted one.
Mm-hmm.
Which again is just something where like she is very quick-witted, so there's an aspect of that that's very true, but I feel like yeah, I could see it also rubbing the wrong way at certain points for sure, especially if they did like the same guy, you know, like, and I
Yeah.
feel like part of that's a potential maturity factor in Lorelai for sure. But yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. What's your last question? I'm so
My,
excited.
my last one's a funny one. Okay. What do we think of the trio of Miss Patty, Babette, and Miss Celine?
Oh, I thought it was going to be Eastside Tilly. Oh, that would be so fun. I
Right?
think to just be in like a piano bar with them exchanging stories,
Right?
especially like Miss Celine and Miss
That's
Patty,
what I was
like
thinking.
that
Yeah.
would be so iconic. Because I feel like they would just it's also one of those things where I feel like they would just be like talking at each other but not really listening to what the other one was saying.
Yep.
But I think that would make for some like very fun, incredible stories for sure.
I agree. I think in kind of interesting that it came right after this, but in the way of Lorelai and Rachel can kind of like be similar, maybe a little too similar at certain points. I feel like the similarity between these three just makes it even better. I feel like they would play off of each other in that way of like, oh, here's this, oh, here's that, oh, here's this, oh, here's
Yeah.
that, in like the opposite of whatever the opposite of a tit for tat, but like just like here's this funny story, here's this funny story. And I feel like that would be a really fun friendship to see, especially because like
Yeah.
they're in similar industries and things and have similar backgrounds. So I feel like just hearing like, oh, you dated him. I also dated him. This was crazy. So I feel like that'd be so fun.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, what a fun little episode.
I know. It's almost a
Wasn't
throwaway.
mini, I
I
know, but
know.
we'll just call it a bonus. This isn't a
Yeah.
mini sode, but it is us. We didn't go for 3 hours this time.
I know. If you do want to
So
watch
that's
that,
good.
we have that going. I'm pretty sure we divided that into 2 episodes because it was
Yeah.
so long, but this is very fun. I like seeing the what ifs and the
Yeah, all
diving
the
into
different
it.
dynamics.
Yeah. Well, thank you for listening. Make sure you subscribe. We do different episodes and mini episodes and bonus episodes over on YouTube. And then we do have new episodes that come out almost every Thursday,
Yeah. We
wherever you
skipped
listen.
1 week, but
Yeah.
we're pretty regular.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.